Welcome to the April 19th, 2017 regular meeting of Danville Architectural Heritage Board. First order of business is if someone's had a chance to review the minutes.
I move for the approval.
A second.
Have a move, approval, discussion. All in favor? Aye. So approved. On the business at hand. For the COAs, first item on the agenda is 135 North 3rd Street. Mr. Hunstead, if you will kindly tell us what you have on your mind, sir.
It's pretty self-explanatory by the notes that you have, and I also provided you with a photograph of each building. And on 135 North 3rd, the door on the right-hand side, well, left side, according to the building, right side facing it, it's a wooden door and it's kind of deteriorated. Also, the window there in the front is deteriorated. So I'm looking at replacing both the window and the door. The material that is there is more or less modern. It's not of the proper age, but at this time I'll probably just go back with another modern door and window. And speaking with Susan, she brought up, well, now you're going to have two doors that aren't going to match, so we'll probably go ahead and replace both doors unless I hear an objection here. And the door,
They don't match now. Make them.
they don't match now, so I think I'd like to make them match. And a door style of that era in the business area, a very common door was a single glass pane with a wide wood frame. And so while the door I put back there may not be a wood frame, I'll probably put back that style, so at least I'll be moving towards a more correct architectural appearance.
Do you have a window chosen for the replacement?
On the window, I'm just going to try to match as close as I can to that size. I'm not looking at putting back a multi-pane window. I want to go back more commercial for the business that might occupy that lower level, that they have a window that they can put a sign in or something, which the current window that there is just single pane. So I'd like to get something more energy efficient and more commercial.
And it doesn't, we can't say anything about it, but I'm just curious, what color are you going to paint it?
We are right now leaning towards white. And it would be the only white building on that street. And maybe coming back to you later on for an awning and put a black and white striped awning. But that's not for today. That's Texas calling. I have no idea why. But
I was going to say your boss is in the back of the room. It's not her.
I have not necessarily a question, but a suggestion maybe. These colonial faux,
I don't
not
like
true to the
them.
building, it would be great if you could take those down when you're painting, if they're loose. Because they really aren't true to the building, and it would look
I would be
so
happy to
much
remove
nicer,
those.
I think.
What I'd really like to do is, like John replaced his all of the on his building, the small square windows all across the top. That's what was originally in that building, I'm quite sure, although I haven't been able to find a photograph of it.
Now, it looks pretty much the way it does now, because it was built after they took down all those other buildings there.
Well, in doing the remodeling, I found where there's actually a lintel that goes across the entire front. And if you'll notice on the outside, you do have the masonry one-piece stone that goes across that. And it's been filled in with brick. All the brick is the same. So I'm pretty sure that if I could ever get back to a picture before 1960, that you would see that that was windows across the front. And what also leads me to believe that is because the original back of the building has windows across the back at that level. So I think that was the original. I can't keep looking for
I
me.
keep looking.
But I am willing to take those things down over the top
Yeah.
of the doors. Any questions on 135? On 119, I don't know if you want to handle each one
We'll
or,
have to vote on 135 separately.
Okay,
all right.
So, do I hear a motion?
I'll make it.
Your motion, Judith?
approve.
Second, to approve. Any other discussion? Looks to be compliant. All in favor? Aye. Those opposed?
Aye.
All right.
On the 119, if you can see from the photo, I've had some copper that I've noticed maybe as long as 6 months ago. It's just when the wind blows, I could tell that it was raising off. In the last a couple of weeks with the storms we've had coming through here, now I'm panicking because it is definitely coming off, as you can see by the photograph. So that's basically repair. Just hopefully I can get to it. I need an 80-foot lift machine to get that high, and I should have reserved it and started this a month ago because now all the machines are out. So I'm waiting for the next machine to be returned so that I can get up there and reattach that. On the everything else that was tan in that picture is actually, except for some repair areas, is actually galvanized sheet metal that's been shaped
That's
to
amazing.
give it those architectural features. And there are several areas on it where at some time in the past, particularly on the gutter portion just underneath the copper roof, there's been repairs made to it where they actually used fiberglass. I can't really say until I get there how extensive a repair or renovation. I could be doing anything from patching another hole with some fiberglass or maybe a piece of aluminum, or I could be removing it and redoing the whole thing. But, you know, until I can get up that high and start taking off the damage, I really don't know what's underneath.
But your repairs are gonna match what's there now.
The only, when I repair, if, I'll probably go back white.
Yeah, we don't care about the color.
That's okay.
Yeah, we don't.
Just because, particularly if I go with any type of a polymer or aluminum, it won't be galvanized steel. That's not what was originally there. And I don't want to go back with wood because this is an area you want to repair and you want to stay for a long time. So that's the 119.
I would move that we approve with the condition that if you do have to make any major alterations, that you call us back and we'll look at them. But this looks,
Yeah. It's gonna look much
Yeah.
better when you're done.
yeah.
Thanks.
And what do you consider a major alteration?
Well, if you have to tear out like this corner piece here and rebuild it, and it's gonna alter what it looks like from the street, I would say that would be a major, you know, if you're gonna change what we see in terms of the scale and the look, which I'm sure you know, but otherwise.
The current architectural feature there's a bead that goes around the bottom. And in many places, that's probably, from the one side, approaching 50% is gone. So I probably will remove that entirely and not replace it.
Which piece is that?
You can see right above the
this?
brick,
Oh, this?
not the whole cornice, and it may not show up in that picture, but there's it looks like a 3-inch,
Flashing?
no, it's an architectural feature. You really don't notice it from the street too well, except in the one place where it's pulled away. Let me see if it shows.
Oh, that little lip, yeah. Actually, it looks like that would hold water more than anything.
Yeah, I don't know if it's there because it's covering something. At one point, they, below that, there's a piece of, looks like to be 8 or 10 inch wide flat bar steel that wraps around. It's been welded around the top of the brick to keep any brick from coming loose and falling, I presume. That's not an original part of the structure.
Yeah, from looking at it with you, it looks like it's been patched and patched and patched numerous times through the years, never really repaired, just patched.
It's just so expensive, you know, the lift, just to get up there is $4,000 before you do anything. So it's just because of where it's at and the height, it's just whatever you do up there, it's not very cheap.
Okay.
So this will likely be a patch that I do, and I'll have to paint it all. There's chipped and peeling paint, even where the galvanized steel is still looks serviceable. It's going to have to be primed and painted.
Any other questions? Do I have a motion? You made the motion? It stands. Do I have a second from John? Any further discussion? All in favor? Aye. Any
Aye.
opposed? Very good. Thank you, sir. And thanks again for all the work you're doing downtown, one building at a time.
And I just also want to add, if heaven forbid you get up there and you see a horror show, we can call together an emergency meeting
Absolutely.
really quickly to get you approved for whatever you might need.
Yeah.
Don't hesitate, because you don't know
I
what
think
you're getting.
legally we have to be 24 hours, Bridget,
Yeah.
for public notice, but outside of that,
Yes. You're correct.
Did I tell you about the wrench?
No.
Well, I went all the way up in the bell tower, all the way to the peak, because I wanted to see what the substructure, I didn't want to go out there and try to attach something and there was nothing behind it to fasten to. So the bell room has a wood ceiling with a little access door, and I get above that and I look up and there's something shiny up there. But I can't make out what it is. So I crawl up there a little bit, and on one of the beams, there's a rolled cigarette, never smoked. So sometime or another, there was a worker in that bell tower, and his boss said, okay, break is over, let's get back to work. And he laid that, this is a hand-rolled cigarette. I believe you could pick it up and still smoke it. I left it laying there. And then I figured out, I said, well, that's a crescent wrench. And it looked like it was just suspended. And so I crawled up there, and as you get up there, the beams in that tower, they're 12 inches all the way to the top, square. So the higher you get, I don't know how I don't know how they pick the skinniest man on their crew, I'm sure, to work up there. When I finally get up there, if you notice on the outside of the tower on each side, it looks like an access door that protrudes on the north and south side. And they are held there by a piece of wire that runs between the two of them. And that crescent wrench was what they used to tighten the wire up by simply twisting it, and it's still there.
That's great.
thank you. Next item on the agenda, number 4, is an update on 311 West Main Street. Bridget, would you like to give us an update?
I just got an update from Ms. McCroskey that she's not going to be able to be at the meeting, so can we move this topic down the agenda and go ahead with what we have and then come back to it at the end of the meeting so that we're not holding everything else up?
I got a question, if I may. It's my understanding that the building has been condemned. Is that true, or is that not true?
Yes, that's correct.
It is true?
That's correct.
Well, if the building's condemned, then it seems to me, Mr. City Manager, since you're here, that it falls in the lap of the city commission and you and not this committee. Am I not correct there? What else can we do if it's already been condemned by the city?
Well, codes enforcement is,
Excuse me, and my rationale is, I hear from it, people on Main Street at least once a week, what are you all gonna do with the building? And it all comes back to this committee here, when it seems to me, if it's been condemned, it's not in our lap, it's in your all's lap. And what are you all doing about it, what are you doing about it if it is condemned?
I can file criminal charges.
Do what?
I can go to the county attorney's office. There we go. I can go to the county attorney's office, file criminal charges for failure to comply with demolition notice, take them before district court.
Is that the city's procedure?
That's the way I've done it for the last 30 years.
Essentially, the city commission approves that action, though, prior to it being initiated.
Yeah.
So I'd like to make a motion that, and I want to see if I can get the terminology right here, to ask the city to proceed in what's necessary to get the building fixed. I don't know what potential liability is there. I know there's 3 windows that's fallen out of that building, and the glass is broken on Main Street. You know, are we liable if something happens to a pedestrian? Are you all liable? Or it has to be addressed, and I don't, how long has it been condemned?
5 years? I think 5 years.
I was trying to think when Clay passed away, it was condemned right after he passed away. It's been
At least 5
4 years
I think
since
5
Mr.
years.
Clay passed away.
He
About-
died before I left, and I left in 2012, so.
So we've batted this around up
Yeah.
here amongst us for
Yeah.
4 years, and I don't know where the breakdown is, but I would, and I'm not shrugging the responsibility of this committee, but I think the city needs to move forward on that, and that would be my motion, I guess.
Okay. Is that a valid motion?
That's my motion.
I have discussion, and if you could second it, I can ask now.
Do we have a second?
Just a second, I'm reading the ordinance about
Okay.
our piece of the ordinance.
I guess my motion would say that to put the responsibility of that building and where it goes in the lap of the city instead of the lap of the Architectural Heritage Board, which has nothing to do with the ordinance, by the way.
Yeah, well, this ordinance just sort of alludes to the city will do their action and just notify the chairman of what action they've taken. So I think you're right.
We're pretty much,
I
at this
think you're
point, we're
correct.
powerless to do anything.
Yes.
Do what, Ron?
Mr. Bowling, I think you are correct. Once a building is condemned by the city, it's beyond the scope of your committee's activity.
Yes.
And incumbent upon the city then to follow through with its enforcement.
So if we get complaints, then we direct them to Mr. Broach or you or the mayor or who?
Yes, sir, that would be the appropriate thing to do.
Okay. Thank you. Good. Going to vote on it?
So your motion was to ask the city to proceed with what's necessary to get the building fixed?
Yes.
Okay.
I'll second.
We have a second. Further discussion?
No, my question was answered, thank you.
Your question was answered? Any other discussion?
Nope.
I have a motion. I have a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Those opposed? All right. Let the minutes show accordingly.
Tom, can I bring up one thing just while we're talking about architecture downtown before we move on?
Sure.
Out of order. We have 2 properties on Main Street that I've been kind of watching as I drive through town with severely deteriorating awnings. And I believe that would fall under the maintenance portion of the ordinance on page 186. And I just wanted to know if we could ask Bridget and Tom to look at that and see if there's some action that we need to take
think that would be appropriate.
Yeah. So-
One I'm aware of, I'm
Well,
probably
we've
aware of.
got two, and one is the, I hate to call out a business, but one is the Main Street Furniture, and it may just need a simple cleaning. And the other is the Carol Bridal awning, which I think has been shredded for a couple months now. So
Yeah.
with spring coming, it might be a time to
Yeah.
look at that.
Did one of the windows from the building next door fall through that?
That I don't know, but,
I believe so.
yeah.
Yes, sir. Let me recognize Mr. Nick Wade of the Heart of Danville.
The damage to Carol's awning was storm damage. So, and I do want to let everyone know that I have approached them about applying for a facade improvement grant through the Heart of Danville.
Fantastic. Good.
So I'm waiting to see if they will follow through.
Okay. I think just a mention of, we'd like that
Yeah.
would be good. Very good, Julie, thank you. On to item number 5, review of the letter from the mayor, Paris, to the superintendent of Norfolk Southern. Has everyone had a chance to review? John, this is kind of your project.
Since the city manager's here, I got another question for him. I think y'all have done a nice job with the letter, and I commend you for that. My question would be, and it's going to Mr. Wilson in Decatur, Illinois, and I know this is an added expense, it takes time, but sometimes a personal visit and hand-delivered letter has a lot more weight than just a letter coming in the mail. Have you all ever considered maybe hand-delivering this to Mr. Wilson in Decatur, Illinois, with all the other attributes of the city of Danville? Just a thought.
Approximately a year ago, the mayor and I met with Mr. Wilson and had that initial discussion, and we could likely have another meeting with him if the city commission adopts this letter
Good
and,
deal.
and plans to send it out, formally the letter and informally a meeting,
Okay.
just to follow up on our earlier
Good deal.
discussion. I think it is a good idea.
Good deal.
Very
Thanks,
good.
Ron.
Very
Yeah.
good. Letter acceptable to us
Yeah.
to review? Have a motion? Do we need a motion on this, or do we just need to
I think a motion would be
show
formal.
it official?
Uh-huh.
Okay.
I'll make that motion.
Have a motion? Second. Any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Motion carries.
Okay.
Item number 6, and Bridget, if you'd like to introduce our guest today.
We're very excited to have Ms. Vicki Berenberg with us from the Kentucky Heritage Council, and she's going to talk to us about the Certified Local Government Program, and also your chance to ask her any questions you might have. So
Thanks
thank you
for
so much,
coming
Vicki, for
down.
coming. She is our lifeline at Kentucky Heritage Council, so
Okay.
she helps us with everything, so
I
thank
see
you.
your emails all the time, so
Yes.
thank you.
Somebody must be up in the ductwork.
Is that wrench?
You're going to have that behind you, so you can either move around or come out
down.
here.
I'm ready.
Whichever way you want to,
Oh, yeah.
it's going to be right behind you.
I'm coming down.
All right, is everybody comfortable? Can you all hear me? Thanks again for inviting me to be part of the meeting today. As Bridget said, my name is Vicki Berenberg. I am the Historic Preservation Planner at the Kentucky Heritage Council. I also coordinate the Certified Local Government Program for the state of Kentucky. And I'm here today for a couple of different reasons. Danville is a CLG. As part of that process, you undergo an evaluation periodically. So today was my opportunity to observe your meeting and your procedures. And it also gives me the opportunity to introduce you to the CLG program if you're not familiar. I want to give you a little bit of history about the historic preservation framework in the U.S. and how Danville fits into that. So thanks again, and please feel free, if you have a question at any point, just put your hand up. We'll be kind of informal about this today. All right. So as I mentioned, Danville is a CLG. I did pass out some handouts before the meeting, and one of the handouts that all of you received, all of the AHB members received, was a copy of the Certified Local Government Agreement that was executed back in 1994. And it lays out what your responsibilities are in your partnership with our office and the National Park Service. So we want every preservation commissioner or architectural review board member who is part of this program to understand what it means, what the responsibilities entail, and how the work that you do fits into the larger preservation framework. And I put this presentation together to be educational. I used to be on a preservation commission in Illinois for many years, and that community, the community of Wilmette, was a certified local government, but no one from the state ever came to any of our meetings, and I really didn't know what that meant until I was no longer on the commission and had gone to grad school and learned what that designation actually meant. So we want you to know so that you can feel comfortable talking to the public and explaining what your role is in the larger picture. And to start, I'm just going to give you a little bit of preservation history. So this is where we usually begin when we discuss historic preservation in the United States. This, of course, is a picture of Mount Vernon, George Washington's home. This building was falling into serious disrepair in the middle 1800s. There was talk of developing it into a nursing home for veterans. And an effort to save the property from development was led by a woman named Anne Pamela Cunningham. And she organized a group of like-minded women into the Mount Vernon Ladies Association, and they actually raised $300,000 and purchased the property in 1860. And this effort sort of epitomizes early preservation efforts in the United States. They were primarily supported by a private individual, typically a woman, for some reason. The goal of most efforts was to save landmark buildings and those things that held associations with the important men in early events in our United States history. The federal government or even the state governments really didn't have any role to play at this point. That began to change by the end of the second half of the 19th century. The federal government began to get involved with preservation efforts, but it was primarily to preserve natural features. Yellowstone was designated a national park in 1872. There were also efforts to prevent development at Civil War battlefield sites, and also to prevent the looting and destruction of early settlement sites in the Southwest. Casa Grande Ruin in Arizona was designated a national monument by Congress in 1889, and at that time it was appropriated $2,000 for its protection. That was the very first federal historic preservation funding in the U.S. Now, in the early 1900s, we got the Antiquities Act. This was the first historic preservation legislation. It pertained only to federal lands. It was signed by Teddy Roosevelt, who of course is our conservation president. And the focus of this legislation was primarily the preservation of archaeological sites. Again, looting continued to be a problem in Arizona and other parts of the Southwest. Mesa Verde, despite being designated a national park, had serious problems with looting. So this act was passed to establish stiff penalties for the destruction of federally owned sites, and it prompted the survey and designation of other culturally significant sites throughout the country. It also transferred the authority for administering preservation activities from Congress to the Department of the Interior, and that is where they remain today. Then in 1916, the National Park Service was established, and it was charged with administering designated historic sites such as Jamestown and Yorktown that fell within the National Park System. At the local level, and after the constitutionality of zoning laws was upheld in 1926, preservation zoning began to be established. First in Charleston, South Carolina in 1931, and then in New Orleans in 1936. And then after that, other communities began to do it too. We had San Antonio in 1939, Alexandria in 1946, Williamsburg 1947, Georgetown 1950. So state enabling legislation played a role in some of this activity, but at the federal level, the government really still did not have a large role to play in historic preservation activity. That began to change in 1935 with the passage of the Historic Sites Act. This law declared that it was national policy to preserve for public use historic sites, buildings, and objects of national significance for the inspiration and benefit of the people of the United States. This act formalized the responsibility for preservation activity through the National Park Service, including authorizing the identification and survey of significant sites, and it codified and institutionalized the Historic American Building Survey Program. Have you all heard of this? Sometimes it's referred to by the acronym HABS. It was a program that started a couple years earlier as a national work program for out-of-work architects, draftsmen, and photographers during the Depression. In 1935, it was codified. It still exists today. You should check out their website online. You can just Google HABS. All of the documentation there is recorded and online and available to look at. There are several pages of documentation on different historic resources in Danville. In 1949, the National Trust of Historic Preservation was created. Many people don't realize that it initially started as a quasi-public organization. It was established by Congress. And it was modeled after a similar organization in the United Kingdom. The National Trust was charged with the acquisition and maintenance of historic sites of significance and coordinating their preservation with the National Park Service. About 10 years after this, it merged with another organization and it became totally membership-based and remains that way today. Membership-based nonprofit advocacy organization to support preservation. By the middle of the 20th century, the federal government was getting involved with massive public improvement projects. Historic neighborhoods and their resources were severely impacted as a result of this. One such initiative, of course, was the construction of our federal highway system, as well as federally funded projects tied to the clearance of areas perceived as blighted. That process of urban renewal actually just wiped out. You can see here, this particular project was in St. Louis. You can see the surrounding neighborhood, which is what the middle used to look like too. But what was constructed really didn't fit the character of the neighborhood. Many things were lost without any opportunity to have a discussion about it. And what was built in its place was not necessarily successful too. This particular project was later torn down in 1972 when the government realized that maybe high-rise, low-income housing was not the best approach. But all of this destruction was really awakening and galvanizing the preservation movement across the country. Private projects, too, were causing the public to have more support for local regulation. The icing on the cake was the loss of Penn Station in New York City. This is a beautiful Beaux-Arts building designed by one of our country's premier architectural firms, McKim, Mead & White. It was built in 1910. Charles McKim pronounced it a monumental gateway and entrance to New York City. But by the mid-century, the Pennsylvania Railroad Company, which owned it at the time, complained that it was too expensive to maintain. And they tore it down. It covered 2 city blocks. It was so large and imposing, it took 3 years to demolish it. It was replaced with Madison Square Garden, which you're probably all familiar with. The railroad tracks of Penn Station remain underneath the structure of Madison Square Garden. It's a little disorienting if you come in on the train there. At least it was for me the first time. You wonder why you're in the basement. When it was completed, the renowned architect Vince Scully said, "One used to enter New York City like a god, now one scuttles in like a rat." So there was a huge outcry against the Pennsylvania Railroad Company for this action, and it spurred much support for more governmental regulation to prevent the loss of cultural landmarks. And as a result of this, in 1965, New York City's Landmarks Preservation Commission was established. And that is the body there that does the same work that you do here in Danville. In 1966, as a result of all of this stuff happening, the National Trust, headed by a committee that included Lady Bird Johnson, published a report called With Heritage So Rich. This book, I think, is out of print, but you might be able to get it, a used copy on Amazon. It was available the last time I checked. The report illustrated the historic resources that had been lost over the years and proposed an expanded role for historic preservation supported by the federal government. And because of that, Congress passed the National Historic Preservation Act the same year, which closely followed the recommendations of the report. Passage of that act established the National Register for Historic Places and the National Historic Landmarks programs, the Advisory Council on Historic Preservation, which is an independent federal agency to promote historic preservation activity and advise the President and Congress on historic preservation policy. It also established a protective review process for historic sites that are impacted by federal undertakings. By undertaking, we mean anything that uses federal money or requires a federal permit. And this process is sometimes referred to as Section 106 because that's the particular part of the act that addresses it. It also established a system of state historic preservation offices, each with a mandated set of responsibilities. So that's how the Heritage Council came to be. And later amendments established the Historic Preservation Fund, the Certified Local Government Program, the Tribal Historic Preservation Officers, and federal tax incentives for historic preservation activity. So the Act created an organizational framework to carry out historic preservation activity in the public realm. And as a certified local government, you are part of this framework, carrying out preservation activities at the local level in partnership with the state and federal government. Key points. The Act established historic preservation as national policy. It devolved a wide range of responsibilities for historic preservation work to the National Park Service in partnership with other entities. The Act mandated that federal preservation programs would rely on the voluntary cooperation of property owners of historic properties, and it would not interfere with ownership rights. But at the same time, it encouraged the development of local preservation laws, which actually have the power to protect historic resources. The National Historic Preservation Act recognized that not only should individual structures be recognized, but also historic contexts and groups of structures that together tell a larger story than an individual structure, this was a new way of thinking about historic preservation at the time. The act also served to formalize a systematic process to achieving historic preservation objectives, and it involves these steps right here. Whether you're operating at the federal, state, or local levels, this is the basic framework for the execution of historic preservation under the National Historic Preservation Act, and it is all accomplished with the input and participation of the public. We start with the historic context. What is that? Well, that provides information regarding how resources relate to one another. Aspects of history, architecture, archaeology, engineering, and culture are all collected and organized based on cultural themes and geographical and chronological limits, and it defines their relationship to one another. Context describes significant broad patterns of development that may be represented by historic resources. The significance of any given resource can only be judged and explained when it is evaluated within its historic context. And then the other steps in the preservation framework include identification, evaluation, designation, sometimes referred to as registration, and protection, which we also define as the treatment for historic properties. Let's start with identification. This is another way to describe architectural survey, which you're probably all familiar with. Under the National Historic Preservation Act, each state must conduct a comprehensive survey and maintain an inventory of historic resources. Kentucky has surveyed about 100,000 resources, all over 50 years of age in all 120 counties. Survey records typically record location, appearance, date of construction, materials, style, character-defining features, and more. And the purpose is to aid with planning efforts, whether it's the development of the state historic preservation plan or a local community's preservation plan. Because of your partnership as a CLG, one of your main responsibilities is having a system in place to conduct and maintain an ongoing survey of your local resources, coordinated with our inventory process at the state level. Survey also includes archaeology. While much of Kentucky appears rural and unspoiled, man has been interacting with and modifying the landscape for 12 to 13,000 years. Our agency coordinates an ongoing archaeological survey along with the Department of Anthropology at UK and the Kentucky Archaeological Survey. 27,000 sites have been recorded across the state, but that only represents about 6% of what's out there. So as CLGs, we encourage you to think about archaeological resources both in your preservation planning and in your project review. The next step of the framework is evaluation. Survey data, together with the historic context, helps us to establish the significance of a given resource or a group of resources. Significance can be national, regional, or local. Designation or registration. At the state and federal level, this refers to the National Register of Historic Places. Kentucky has a very successful National Register program. We have the 4th highest number of listings, over 3,200 district sites and structures, behind New York, Massachusetts, and Ohio. At the local level, designation refers to your locally designated landmarks and historic districts. Your ordinance has outlined a process for accomplishing such designations using established criteria. Now, there is lots of confusion about what the National Register designation means. And as a CLG, we want you to be able to articulate to property owners what it is and how it affects properties. The National Register is the federal government's official list of district sites, structures, and objects deemed worthy of preservation. These things can be listed individually, but many of them are listed as contributing resources within larger historic districts. Significance does not have to be national. It can also be significant to the state or locally to a community and still be on the National Register. Being listed provides for consideration when there are those federal undertakings that I mentioned previously. It also is the benchmark to qualify for federal historic preservation financial incentives, such as the state and federal rehabilitation tax credit program. Being on the National Register is not a necessary step to determining the significance of local resources, although many communities do use the same criteria for establishing significance prior to local landmark or historic district designation. This is important to understand because in your role as a certified local government, one of your responsibilities under the National Historic Preservation Act is to review local properties that have been nominated to the National Register and make a determination as to their eligibility. You get to weigh in on whether or not a property is eligible. Only CLGs get to do that. Other communities are not afforded that opportunity at all. It's a process that happens really, local property owners are notified and they can object if they wish, but there's no formal process for public input except for certified local governments. So we want you to be familiar with the National Register eligibility criteria. There are 4. Criterion A, the property must make a contribution to the major pattern of American history. B, the property is associated with significant people from our past. C, it concerns the distinctive characteristics of the resource by its architecture and construction, including having great artistic value or being the work of a master. D, the property has yielded or may be likely to yield information important to prehistory or history. And of course, with D, I'm talking about archaeology. So I have left Bridget over there in her pile of many things that I left her today, a copy of the National Register Bulletin that will assist you in making those eligibility determinations. Hopefully she can scan that or copy it and make sure that it's available to all of you should you need it in the future, which you probably will. Okay, let's talk about what the National Register does not do. It does not restrict the rights of property owners. Does not. It does not stop demolition. Only local ordinances can do that. It does not automatically confer local landmark or historic district designation. That can only happen with a local process. It does not involve any review at the local level, except for those communities which are CLGs, and in those cases, it's only to determine eligibility. That's all. National Register designation can only ensure that there will be a review of federal projects for their potential impacts, and it will encourage avoidance or minimization of harm, but it does not require a review for state-funded or privately funded projects. And it does not guarantee that there will not be an adverse effect. National Register designation also does not guarantee the availability of funding for rehabilitation. Okay, the final step of the framework is the protection and treatment piece. The activities at the federal and Kentucky state level are tied to that Section 106 review process that I mentioned, and also the administration of federal and state historic rehabilitation tax credits. The goal of 106 is to avoid, minimize, or sometimes mitigate effects caused by federal undertakings. It involves a consultation among stakeholders affected by a project, As a local government, you have a right to a seat at the table to discuss the identified effects of federal undertakings on the historic resources in your community. If adverse effects are identified, typically a memorandum of agreement is developed to determine how they will be addressed. At the local level, protection and treatment involves local designation and design review to manage change. That is your certificate of appropriateness process. The word treatment refers to the approach taken to preserve a historic resource. What are the tools for protection and treatment? Well, the tool that allows protection at the local level is the enabling legislation to allow city and county governments to administer historic preservation programs. These are found in KRS, Kentucky Revised Statutes, KRS 82.6604 states that any city participating in the Certified Local Government Historic Preservation Program shall comply with the regulations of the Kentucky Heritage Commission, which was our name in 1990 when that legislation was passed. Historic preservation regulation is also referenced in KRS Chapter 100, which contains the state zoning laws. And as far as tools for treatment, at the federal and state level, we have a set of best practices developed by the Department of the Interior. The Secretary of Interior's standards for the treatment of historic properties has 4 treatment approaches: preservation, rehabilitation, restoration, and reconstruction. The standards for rehabilitation are the ones that are most widely used. They are regulatory for Section 106 and for the use of federal and state tax incentives. For certified local governments, they are also expected to be used as the basis for developing design guidelines at the local level. Also, CLGs are prohibited from spending any federal money they receive on any project or endeavor, including design review, that does not meet the standards for rehabilitation. I brought some booklets on the standards today, and I left Bridget with a whole stack of them for the public as well. These can be really helpful, especially if you are talking with anyone in the community about the potential for utilizing the rehabilitation tax credit program. And here's a great example of a project that was that utilized historic rehabilitation tax credits. The federal credit has been in place since 1976. It has assisted with the preservation and continued use of over 41,000 historic properties across the country. In 2015, Kentucky ranked 9th nationally in its use of the federal credit. Probably so high because we also have a state credit that it can be partnered with. Not all states have that. And the Kentucky State Rehabilitation Tax Credit has been in place since 2005. There's a little handout up there that has some stats from the 2nd Congressional District, of which Danville is a part of. Since 2005, 82 completed projects have generated $30.7 million of investment. And we encourage our CLGs to enact additional incentives to support historic preservation at the local level. Sounds like Heart of Danville has a facade grant program, which is really great. So you may be wondering how all of the mandates that exist in the National Historic Preservation Act are funded. Well, Section 108 of the NHPA established the Historic Preservation Fund in 1976. This pool of revenue does not come from tax dollars, but from the sale of oil and gas leases for drilling off the outer continental shelf. So the idea is that you mitigate the loss of one resource by providing for another. In 1980, Congress authorized $150 million annually for the Historic Preservation Fund. That's represented by the red line there at the top. However, they must appropriate the money, and they have never appropriated the full amount. The high water mark was $94 million in 2001. Appropriations have declined significantly since that point. In 2014, the appropriation was $46.9 million. It has remained at about that level the last few years, with some increase the last couple of years for some special grants to preserve resources associated with American civil rights and also underrepresented populations. So how this works is that each state receives a block grant from this appropriation. From the first $20 million, each state receives a base award of approximately $357,000 per year. Above $20 million and up to $50 million, each state's award is determined by an apportionment formula that considers things such as population, land area, and the number of historic resources. Above $50 million, competitive factors come into play, and 50% of the additional award must be spent on local preservation initiatives. And if you get above $65 million, half of the extra money has to go directly to the CLGs. So if we ever get some better appropriations down the road, being a CLG means you're very well positioned to take advantage of additional funding. So let's talk specifically about the CLG program. I did pass out copies of another presentation that I'm not going to give you today, but it kind of goes into greater detail the responsibilities of the program and the requirements. There are over 1,900 CLGs nationwide. Kentucky currently has 23. They are required to meet specific standards. There are federal responsibilities. That includes enforcing appropriate legislation for the protection of historic resources, establishing a qualified commission, including at least 2 commission members that meet professional qualification standards set by federal regulations, to the extent, of course, that these folks are available and willing to serve in your community. You have to make the effort to find them. Establish and maintain a system of ongoing survey of historic properties. Public participation in the local preservation program, including the National Register designation process. Those are all the federal responsibilities. Now, federal law allows the states to add additional responsibilities to the CLGs, and Kentucky has done this. These include acting as a liaison to individuals and organizations in historic preservation matters, ongoing public education and outreach, and very specific things such as continuing education for commission members, minimum number of meetings annually. You must complete an annual report. You must have professionally qualified historic preservation staff, and more. So the handout that I gave you goes into this in a little more detail. You can also get more information from the Kentucky Certified Local Government Program Manual, which is available on our website. In exchange for participating in the state and federal partnership and taking on these responsibilities, there are benefits to your community. Of course, the primary benefit of becoming a CLG is that you are employing best practices to ensure the preservation of your historic resources for future generations of Danville residents and visitors to enjoy. But secondary benefits include having access to the staff, ongoing support and technical expertise at the Kentucky Heritage Council. You may also compete for available funding to assist with local preservation projects and initiatives. The National Historic Preservation Act mandates that 10% of that block grant that we receive every year from the federal government must be distributed to the CLGs. It's a competitive process. It requires the CLG to apply for funding. Projects are evaluated according to criteria before funding is awarded. And we encourage our CLGs to partner with other organizations in their communities that promote history and preservation to formulate and execute projects. You don't have to do this all on your own. Sometimes you can partner with other entities and they can help you get the match from volunteer hours and those kind of things. Projects tend to be more successful when you've got more buy-in and investment across the board anyway. Danville's made really great use of the grant program since I have been the coordinator. You've done some really wonderful preservation education and outreach. You've developed some promotional materials. You had a great event with Daniel Carey from Savannah come and speak about revolving funds. And right now you're in the midst of updating your design guidelines, which we are helping you with financially. So I like to give all of my commissions a list of recommendations to give their programs a little more local impact and raise public awareness and support. Many of these things would qualify for grant assistance. Many of these things you're doing already. Not all my CLGs are actually doing as well as this community is doing in many ways. One thing we encourage is that you participate in the local and regional comprehensive planning process. I noticed that that is a process that's underway right now. There was some article in the newspaper about it. And I also noticed that your 2007 comp plan did have a historic preservation element. I'm not sure if this commission participated in the development with that or how it happened, but we would encourage you to be involved with that so that you can have a voice for preservation in the overall planning process. We also encourage our CLGs to develop a local preservation plan, kind of a specific roadmap for what you want to achieve long-term and how you'll go about it. That's definitely a type of project that would be eligible for funding through our CLG grant program. We'd like you to practice ongoing community outreach, perhaps through a newsletter or blog. Develop or strengthen a user-friendly informational website. Your website is good. You've got a lot of really good information and links for the public, and we appreciate that. And you also explain your certified local government designation, which we appreciate very much. We like to see our CLGs make their survey data available online so that property owners can look up information on the historic resources in the community. We encourage you to develop an annual work plan. Present at least once a year to the City Commission, making them aware of the CLG designation and recapping the accomplishments of the Historic Preservation Program, including how many applications were reviewed and approved. Partner with those other organizations. Develop local preservation incentives such as tax moratoriums, facade grants, and more. Celebrate Historic Preservation Month each May. Have the mayor make a proclamation, host a local awards program, nominate notable projects for a state award. The Ida Lee Willis Awards happen every year, and we're always looking for nominations. Host a preservation-related event or educational session. Now, this community does a good job of all these things, and I know that you partner with the Boyle Landmark Trust and Heart of Danville, and we notice you're doing a good job there. I'm going to talk a minute about the important role of staff. One of the things that a successful preservation program has, or often has, is kind of that helpful, friendly staff person who can be the friendly face of preservation in the community. I know Bridget has been an invaluable resource since I have been the CLG coordinator, and Danville has accomplished a lot of great things during her tenure as staff liaison to your commission. But a community that has as many important historic resources as Danville, and particularly one that is a CLG, needs to have preservation expertise on their staff in order to meet the many responsibilities outlined in the CLG agreement to the best of your ability. So we like to see someone who can devote their sole attention to the work at hand and who can bring the proper credentials so your program has the integrity it needs to thrive. These are just a few things on this list. It's not by no means comprehensive. of the things that dedicated preservation staff can assist with. Helping to educate and assist property owners, streamline processes. I'm not sure how you're handling it now, but in many of my communities that have designated staff, when an applicant comes in and they have a proposal, if it meets the design guidelines, they do not have to come before you. The staff can sign off on it and they are good to go. We'd also like to see an expansion of the use of federal and state historic rehab tax credits here in Danville, and that requires somebody who can really help property owners maybe understand how that program works. A dedicated staff person can kind of focus on that preservation planning piece and fit preservation holistically into Danville and Boyle County's overall land use planning goals. You can better conduct and update an ongoing historic resource survey. You can assist with the development of new overlay zones. You've got one now. Your comp plan from 2007 makes reference to the idea that you should identify and recommend more, but I don't know that you actually have the time or resources or ability to move forward on that. Also, having expertise will help with the development of staff reports that can assist you with your design review process. I'm not sure what you're doing right now in terms of the packet of information that you get before each meeting, if everything is provided by the applicant, but if you have designated staff who can actually develop a report, talk about the significance of the structures, give a little history and background on their importance to Danville, go out and take the necessary photos, that can be really helpful. So, and also it will help with that collaboration piece, and just ensure that you're meeting all of your certified local government responsibilities. So I put a copy of your overlay district here, and then I started thinking about Danville's, greater Danville and the historic resources there. So I pulled a map up from our GIS database at the office that shows what has been surveyed here, at least what we have a record of, and also all the red parts there are National Register districts. And then, if you'll indulge me here, this is not very well done, but I kind of overlaid it there as best as I could to line it up. And you can see that while you've got your overlay zone here, there's still a lot of area that's got important stuff in it that's not really covered by any sort of design review. I'm not sure if there's time or the ability to concentrate on those things outside of your overlay zone. So that's something I just want you to be thinking about as you move forward in your discussions of your preservation program. I also have some recommendations for making your Historic Preservation Commission meetings more effective. One thing I like to recommend is that the chairman begin the meetings with a reading of the purpose and intent from your ordinance. You have a section at the beginning, section 1. If you go to, you don't have to read the whole thing, it's long, but if you go to the tail end of it, section 1H, there's a list of reasons why you're doing this, 1 through 7. And I like to encourage my commissions to kind of read that list at the beginning of the meeting. It sets the tone. It adds credibility to your commission and its activities. Also, show up prepared. Make sure that you've read your packet in advance, you've looked at all the material. I encourage you to go and visit the property personally before you come to discuss it in the meeting. One thing I didn't hear anything about today, and I'm going to recap a lot of this in my letter to you in a couple weeks, is there was no discussion of the significance of the property before you began your deliberation as to whether or not the treatment was appropriate. So we like to see that. We like to see a discussion of the significance, make that part of your findings of fact. That's another thing that I want to encourage you to work on, is developing findings of fact before you actually make a motion to approve or deny an application. Also, there was absolutely no reference to the design guidelines in any of your discussion. So even if the meeting's being recorded, the public's not really going to know what it is you're talking about if you're not making that effort to tie your comments back to the design guidelines. Also, you want to avoid all ex parte communication. And in case you're not familiar with what that is, that means any communication about a case outside of this public hearing, ixnay. You can't really do that because you could have a decision overturned on that basis alone. If someone approaches you, and I know it's really hard in a small town, everybody wants to talk to everybody about everything. Someone approaches you and wants to discuss their project, you have to tell them, no, the proper place to do that is here in the public hearing. If you do happen to not be able to get away from somebody and a discussion happens, make sure you enter it into the record so that it's part of the official record. I want you to keep very careful, detailed, accurate record. Bridget says you record your meetings. That is exemplary. I think that's great that you're doing that. And you want to thank the public for their participation each time. This is all part of a big PR process as well, to make people feel good and positive about it. So we're going to talk just a tiny bit about decision-making mechanics. What are you supposed to be thinking about as you decide whether or not an application is appropriate? Well, I already talked about significance. Another topic is integrity. Key features of the property, the overall context. You know, this isn't just affecting an individual property. The decisions here are affecting the entire district. What's it doing to the whole district when you approve something? Sensitivity to change, the nature of the proposal, cumulative effect, and then, of course, the design guidelines. So I also gave you a handout on design review and the review process and the proper questions that maybe you should formulate as part of your discussion. I think that's a good piece. It was developed by the consultant Nori Winter in Colorado. Hopefully you'll find that helpful. Let's talk a little bit about significance and integrity. Integrity is defined as the extent to which a property is able to convey its significance. When an architectural survey is completed or updated, properties that have lost much integrity over time, that's the cumulative effect, are often listed as non-contributing to the significance of the district. Now, you all have a survey. It probably has some information on it about whether or not a property is contributing or not contributing. And you probably don't want to hold those non-contributing properties to the very same standards in your design guidelines that you would a property that has pristine integrity, right? I mean, a lot of the commissions I work with will begin their deliberation by making a statement of significance, whether or not it's contributing or non-contributing. And then in your design guidelines, as you're updating them now, you can make reference to the fact that non-contributing properties are probably going to be given a little more leeway than those that have greater cultural significance. These particular buildings here both started life looking like this. But you're probably not going to be as concerned about this person replacing their replacement windows as you are about this person replacing their original windows. Again, findings of fact. I would recommend that you formalize your language a little bit better as you are making motions to approve applications. This is an example. I like to recommend a two-step process to approving applications. First, establish those findings of fact. A staff report on each case can assist you with this. Sometimes when you have a staff report that a professional preservation or preservation professional has given you, you can just adopt those as your findings of fact if you wish. Otherwise, you need to develop them here as a commission and vote on them. What are they? You've looked at everything. I took this language from your ordinance. It's found in section 6. What you are charged with, your criteria that's actually listed in your ordinance, says that you need to make sure that the work is evaluated in regards to the historic and architectural significance of the resource, the architectural style, design, texture, materials, and color. So articulate that. This will help you have more defensible decisions when you make that statement that you find it is compatible. Or likewise, in the case that it's not compatible, you can say that. And reference those design guidelines that back up the facts. And then once you have established those findings, the motion has been approved, you can move to the second step, which is to approve with conditions, defer if you need more information. Don't ever feel like you have to make a decision if you don't have the information you need. Or deny the application. And that's all I have for today. I want to encourage you to join the National Alliance of Preservation Commissions if you are not already a member. Lots of valuable information from this organization. You may remember that a couple years ago, you actually used one of the CLG grants to bring NAPC here for a day-long educational session, which I thought was really good. They have lots of resources. They have a great listserv that just reading will help all of you to understand this process, how it's carried out in other communities, and it'll strengthen your knowledge and confidence in making decisions. And that's all I have for today. Thank you so much. Does anybody have any questions?
I have a question. I just wanted to thank you for your presentation. It was very informative. I had no idea how much I didn't know. And just wanted to ask, I've never been able to apply for a grant or never have applied for a federal tax credit, which I'm sorry to say, but, and I've let some buildings fall down. I've got other buildings I'm trying to save. But one time I did meet with the federal about a tax credit. They said you had to repair everything, like you couldn't substitute drywall for plaster. And it was just such a deterrence to try to meet their goals. Have they relaxed any of those rules? I mean, it seems like we should be trying to save a building, not be nitpicking every little detail to be sure it's
Right.
historically accurate.
Well, it is a rehabilitation standard. It's not a restoration standard. And I don't know who you spoke to or how long ago that was, so I can't speak to the specifics there, but I would encourage you to get one of those little green books.
Right.
Because generally speaking, it's not that arduous. It's just 10 standards. It's not a big list of design guidelines. Retention of historic fabric is the preferred approach. If it is so deteriorated that it cannot be retained, then they ask you to match it as closely as possible. Design, texture, and also, if possible, materials. But sometimes they allow even substitute materials. It just depends. They're typically not going to allow vinyl for wood. That's reasonable. Vinyl has a shelf life a fraction of wood. So if you're going to get a tax credit for this work, we want it to be done to keep the integrity of the resource intact. I always encourage anybody who's interested in the tax credit to call our office before they get too far down the road. Generally speaking, Jen Williamson or Mike Radicke would be happy to talk to you about your project and just kind of, before you get too far and then find out, oh, we can't do that. Have an understanding up front. Talk about what you want to do and then, get some guidance.
Do you still have to apply for the tax credit before you start the work?
Yes, you should. You really should. I mean, that's what we encourage. We will accept credits sometimes that are done after the fact, but it's a much harder bar because you're submitting work that hasn't been reviewed for its compliance with the standards. So, not to say we don't do it, we do, but it's always better if you can submit. And either way, you're going to have to submit pictures of the before and after, so.
Just
No.
one more quick question.
Sure.
I noticed you said up there that there's nothing you can do, like what you can't do is, property owners can still do what they want to with their property, basically.
National Register. Mm-hmm.
We lost a couple of really nice buildings in Danville. We lost the Garden Bradshaw building, it was torn down for a Lowe's, which, we lost a building that was built in 1840 just last year, I think. And, I don't know if Danville has an application for a demolition permit. Do you all have that? I mean, if we had an application for a demolition permit, I don't know if we have that or not.
We do if it's in the historic district, but if it's outside the district, then
Yeah, that's the problem. We do need, like you said, expand
Right.
our coverage of this, to require any building that's historically significant to have to get a demolition permit, which would give the public time to speak.
To comment and see if there's an alternative.
If I can address that point in particular, there was a public hearing on that building that got torn down, the Fisher Byington House, and people did speak in defense of that house, but it was determined that it was going to come down anyway. So there is already a public system in process, but it is not a part of this district, so we didn't have any say of it.
Right. This goes back to preservation planning, you know. Unfortunately, a lot of preservation programs and preservation activity becomes established in reaction to things, like I talked about today with Penn Station. That's typically the way it goes. People lose something really significant, and then they go, oh my gosh, this system doesn't work. I've got to about it. So I would encourage you to think about your resources, think about the future of them, and think about planning for them.
Vicki, I got a question. In my job, I came across a structure. It's outside the historic district, so I'm going to work to try to save this one. It's a log cabin built in 1845. I did look at the structure from the outside. It's got clapboard and all, but there is significant signs of deterioration. There are several people that are quite interested in it. It does belong to an organization, but I think the organization may be completely unfamiliar with their next step in preservation. Also, it has a lot to do with African American culture here in town, because it is extremely close to the old stagecoach route going to Lexington. So, like I say, and I did send out a violation notice, but to try to get the attention of the organization. But I think their next step would probably be to contact you, maybe in Frankfurt.
Yes, you can encourage them to contact us, but I also want to mention to you that the National Park Service, as part of that Historic Preservation Fund appropriation, the last couple of years, they have been including extra money to help preserve resources that are associated with the American Civil Rights Movement and also underrepresented communities. And it sounds like this structure might, qualify for assistance. Of course, you're going to be competing with a lot of other people for the money, but it might be something you should put on that organization's radar. Kentucky does not allow HPF funds to be used for bricks and mortar projects, but at the federal level, they do. So if you were to get a grant from that program, they could use it towards actual preservation work.
Okay, and they could still contact your office?
Absolutely.
Okay, well, I'm going to continue to work on this. Thank you.
Thank you.
I got a question. Ditto, everything's already been said. What's the difference? Are you familiar with anything called the Kentucky landmark, historic Kentucky landmark, that a particular building that's been designated by the state as a Kentucky landmark? And if you're familiar with that, how does that fit in the web of what we're talking about today?
My understanding, and I don't know that that program is is super active. I think it was at one point, but I don't know that anybody's really actively administering it right now at our office. But my understanding of it, and Marty Perry, our National Register Coordinator, would know a little bit more. He's been there a long time, and I think he was active in administering this program in the past. I think it was available to anybody who took steps to survey their property. You did not have to meet any other criteria other than having it surveyed. That's my understanding. I could be wrong.
Could you,
But I could
would
put
you
Marty
get
in
that
touch with you.
information?
Yes,
Can you get all that
absolutely.
information to Bridget, please?
Yes, I will.
I'd appreciate that.
Okay.
I have an ethics question. So there's none of the off discussion stuff, and as you say, it's a small town. I work at the library, and I deal with local history, so I field a lot of questions about what did this building look like beforehand?
That's fine.
Okay.
All of that's fine. But if anybody's asking you about what they want to do, like something specific to an application, that's off limits.
So if somebody said, I want to paint this building, it's brick now, it has no paint on it, can I at least say, I know you can't do that, it's against your guidelines, or do I just need to refer everything to?
It would
Bridget?
probably be better to refer to Bridget, but you could also encourage them to come to the public meeting, because I thought you had some language in your ordinance that allowed you to engage in a discussion with potential applicants about projects during the public hearing. You'll have to go back and look at the language again. I've got a lot of ordinances in my head, and I don't keep them all straight, but I think it might be in there.
Our ordinance says advise and assist property owners with their historic preservation. So how do you balance the advise and assist with not being able to?
Does it say that as a role of the AH?
It is
B?
with powers and duties of the board. I guess I
Okay.
can send you that.
Yeah. But typically, so that you don't get into legal trouble there, you can advise and assist in general preservation, okay? You just can't talk about a specific application outside of the public hearing. And if, you can always, send football the question over to your preservation staff. That's the real role there for your staff, is to be kind of the gateway to you, and also to be able to help you meet those requirements in your ordinance without getting into trouble.
Any other questions? It's a great opportunity.
Thank you so much.
All right. Before we adjourn, I would like to thank Ron Scott, City Manager, for being here today, and also Commissioner Terry. Thank you, ma'am. Appreciate your interest.
And don't forget about the volunteer luncheon next week, Wednesday.
That is correct.
At 12 o'clock.
One quick question, if I may, before we get out of here. Are there any grants available with a piece of property that's been designated as a Kentucky landmark? That's all dead? Okay.
Money is so hard to come by right now.
Okay. Any tax credits?
Tax credits, if it's on the National Register, that's.
It has to be on the National Register? Okay, thanks.
Or in process of listing, right?
Yeah, I'm not sure exactly what that timeline is, but yeah.
If it's eligible and you go through the process, you can do those at the same time, right?
I think there's a period within that you must get it listed.
Right, okay.
Very good. I'll entertain, no other questions, no other business. I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Motion?
Thank you.
Second. All in favor? Aye. Thank you all.